Well, if you read the tea leaves, I would say he's not going to play, but I really think it's up to Jason Peters at this point. I mean, it's bizarre. Wednesday and Thursday are normally the more heavy practices. Now, obviously, it was raining yesterday, so they went in the bubble, so that could have shifted things. Friday is not, and he's able to go on Thursday. He's not able to go on Friday. It's a bizarre situation. And it's a concerning situation because, as we stated last week, Lane Johnson had no idea where he was going to play until basically right before kickoff, and it's probably going to be another situation like that, and that's not the way you want to go about things. You want to have a clear plan going in during the week, and if it is questionable at this point, it's almost a better situation if you make the decision on Friday and say, he's not going to play. But we'll see how it shakes out. It just gets stranger and stranger by the day, and most of all yesterday, because Chip said he wasn't going to practice, then he practiced, and all of a sudden today he doesn't practice. It's just bizarre.
John, a week of practice for Sanchez. I mean, he moved the ball well last week. Some of the handoffs were a little clunky. He makes his patented pick in the end zone there. But how much do you think a week of practice improves the play from Mark Sanchez?
I think it helps a lot because if even the Eagles, even though they don't do things like normal NFL teams, the number ones get the vast majority of repetitions during the regular season. So Sanchez was getting very little work, and I think you saw that borne out with some of the handoff problems he had with DeMarco Murray. So now that he's gotten all of the first-team reps this week, hopefully that's ironed out, and that'll improve that aspect. And as you mentioned, other than that, the tempo was certainly better. The speed of the offense was back with Sanchez, and he just seems to have a better grasp of what Chip Kelly wants. So I think from that aspect, it's going to be an improvement also. And we'll see. He definitely has to cut out the turnovers, especially in the end zone and in key situations. But let's not forget, early this season, Sam Bradford was doing that himself. So it's not like Mark Sanchez is the only quarterback that's ever done that.
No, and obviously it's a league full of mediocre guys at that position. If you can get a guy to give you a consistent play, you're ahead of the curve, John. And we talked about this early in the show about the league. Basically, like if the Eagles win this week, okay, they're 5-5, they got to win. But if they lose, it's not like they're out. If the league is like a league-wide participation trophy, everybody's just like, hey, we're not out of it. No matter what happens, we're always in. And the Eagles are basically in the same boat as 20 to 25 other NFL teams.
Yeah, you saw it last night if you're watching that game with the horrible uniforms on Thursday night, the horrible 3-6 Jaguars team against the 2-7 Titan teams. And they're fighting to the death because they're both in it. And that shouldn't be the case, but there's a lot of mediocrity in this league. Some people like it. Some people like the parity. Others do not and like truly, truly great teams. But the NFL has been, pretty upfront about the fact that they like the nature of this game where everybody has a chance every week. And that's what they've created. So it's going to continue to be that way. And, one of my major issues with Chip earlier in the week was he seemed rather accepting of that. And for a team that gave him all this power, I don't want to coach a general manager that's accepting of mediocrity because everybody else is mediocre.
Right. It seems like fans are accepting this too, though. Like, hey, we're always in it. The division's bad. I know fans want to win. There's no question about it. But it doesn't seem that this team, John, has the separation ability. They don't have the depth and talent to separate themselves from the pack.
No, they don't. And shockingly, it's on the offensive side of the ball. We all thought that would be the problem defensively. But I think if you look for the most part, that defense week in and week out has generally played well enough to win. It's not to say they haven't had issues at times. They certainly have. The surprising part is the offense is the problem. And it seems to go around like a virus from week to week. One week it might be the offensive line. Then it might be the receivers, then the running game, then the quarterback. they've all had a part in this inconsistency. And obviously, you have a head coach who's supposed to be ahead of the game offensively, and it's been anything but that this season.
John, I wanted to ask you about the offensive line. We had Sal on earlier. He basically said he wasn't sure if Chip Kelly's offense was going to work. It is meant for the NFL, and one of the reasons is because of the way that he has built this offensive line. It is just a decimated offensive line, and you know, some people would say, well, the offensive line play around the league is bad, but is it easy to? Can you surmise that Chip Kelly neglected the offensive line? Hence, yeah, he might have picked players that weren't good enough if he drafted guys, but they virtually neglected that position, and they kind of reap what they sow at this position.
Yeah, I mean, the injuries hurt, and you can't blame that on the head coach. But you're right as far as not drafting guys and not having guys ready to be reserves. Now, we understand if other teams have to dip into their pool of reserves, it's probably going to be an issue too, but you want to have some guys that at least have the skill set to potentially develop, and that's where the big issue is to me. I still think this offensive line is pretty good when everybody's healthy. Not great, but good enough, and that's obviously with Peters at left tackle, Lane Johnson at right tackle, Andrew Gardner at right guard. Now, Gardner's gone for the year. He's been gone for the majority of the season. Peters, we just talked about. Who knows when he's going to be back? And Jason Kelsey, unfortunately, is having his worst year as a professional. So that I can't really blame on Chip Kelly. It's just the reality of the situation. You're expecting the guy to be a Pro Bowl level player because he has been in the past, and he's been anything but. So I think it's fair to criticize for the lack of depth, but I don't think it's fair to criticize him and saying this group is bad because of what he's done. Because this group, on paper, should be one of the Eagles' better ones, but because of a lack of solid play from the center and because of injuries, it hasn't turned out that way.
Yeah, and they gave the money to Barbary. They gave money to Andrew Gardner, two kind of vagabond cast-off. You know, and that's where I have a little bit of an issue. You know, okay, those guys, Barber hasn't got hurt, but he got hurt last. Now you're dependent on him to come back healthy. Gardner's already hurt. Then when Gardner goes down, they've only drafted one offensive lineman since zero offensive linemen since Lane Johnson. He's the only lineman this regime has ever drafted. And that's where it's like, okay, if a guy gets hurt, you have a couple guys who have been battling, you know, in the system, except for instead they got these guys who have basically undrafted cast-offs from other teams stepping in and starting. And, you know, the continuity up there has been an absolute mess. And, you know, yeah, the line hasn't been – when the line plays well, they seem to win. And when the line doesn't play well, they seem to lose, which means about 5 times the line hasn't played very well. Yeah, and that's fair. And the reason I scale it back, I mean, I didn't agree with Chip with the Evan Mathis. I think he should have let him play out his contract and moved on from there. I understand he's a 33-year-old player, so it wasn't going to be a long shelf life anyway. But he was still playing at a high level. The Eagles should have paid him, and he should be the left guard right now, and I think you would have less issues. So I think that criticism is legitimate. I think, as you mentioned, the lack of draft choices is a concern. But the Eagles aren't the only team in the NFL who kind of patch things together at the guard position. It's the tackles in this league that get drafted highly. Everybody thinks, sort of like the running back mentality, even worse. Everybody thinks you can find guards in the later rounds of the draft, and for the most part, that's how teams build because they don't want to spend a ton of money at that position. And you'll see it all over the league. It could be a rookie free agent, could be a 6th-round pick. And some of them develop into Pro Bowl level players. And that's what the Eagles were trying to do. I think it was working out well with Gardner before the injury. I don't think it's worked out well with Barber. And certainly Evan Mathis would help. But the only reason I put that in context is because the Eagles are far from the only team that tries to build their roster that way. Give me your thoughts in some of the match in this game. How do the Eagles match up with Mike Evans?
I think they match up pretty well. I think the secondary has been very good this year, starting with the safeties who both played pretty much at a Pro Bowl level. And the corners, Nolan Carroll's been solid. He's not great. Byron Maxwell's been getting better. it's a concern because of how big Mike Evans is, but he's also inconsistent. A lot of drops. So he's liable to get the big play on you occasionally, but he might drop the football in a key situation. So I don't think by any stretch of the imagination this is like playing a Dez Bryant or Julio Jones. Still a very young player prone to mistakes. So I don't think that's a huge advantage for the Buccaneers.
All right, the run game with Doug Martin, the Eagles, they've been good against the run, not great the last couple of weeks. They haven't been as good. I think, D'Amico is a big factor in that. But how does that run game match up with the Eagles?
Well, Doug Martin's having a great year, and I don't think a lot of people know that. I had him on my midseason All-Pro team. It was a little bit before Adrian Peterson has taken off, and he's a well-rounded running back. He can run the football, he can catch it, he can pick up a blitz. So he's one of the strengths of Tampa Bay's team, and I think you're right. The Eagles' run defense goes as D'Amico goes because really Michael Kendricks, for all the talk and the name and Kiko Alonso and the reputation of those two players, they have not played well against the run. So when D'Amico was out with his hamstring issue, that's when the Eagles had trouble. Now that he's back, Benny Logan's had a tremendous year against the run up front. I think they'll be fine, but this is a good back, so he's going to be effective. It's just a matter of how effective. You want to keep him probably to the 70, 80-yard range instead of seeing him at 120, 130.
How about the matchup, the offensive line against McCoy? He's not Sue, but, can be a disruptive guy. We talked to the people in Tampa. They said that his play has gone down the last couple of weeks, but, if he feels like amping it up, he could be a problem.
Yeah, he's had a bad year. It's so similar to Sue, it's uncanny because Sue's having a bad year. But, they're so physically talented. If they amp it up, as you mentioned, if they show up, and I said it last week about Sue, and he did, and the Eagles couldn't block him. Same situation here. McCoy is an all-pro level player, and if he shows up and he feels like playing, that group we just talked about, Jason Kelsey, Alan Barber, Matt Tobin, I don't know how they're going to block him, similar to last week against Sue. So that, to me, is the biggest concern this week because that's the one area where the Eagles just don't have enough to handle what Tampa Bay has.
What is an area this week with Mark Sanchez specifically playing, John, that you'd like to see them do some more of?
Well, I want to see the running game get going, and I think it's going to be helped by Mark's ability to at least keep the football in that zone read look and take 4 or 5 yards if it's there. I think it's going to be a huge difference. I think it's going to shock people, the difference it makes, because you can't just assume the quarterback is going to hand the ball off. I think that's going to give DeMarco Murray more spacing. It's going to give Darren Sproles more spacing. And Levante David, we talked about McCoy. That's the other big name on the Tampa Bay defense. He's having a terrible year. Overrunning plays, just not in position. His gap control has been bad this year. And I think this Eagles running game is going to be much more effective with Sanchez at quarterback.
Yeah, and, another thing is no Ryan Matthews. Kenyon Barner probably going to be activated this week. We saw Darren Sproles. I thought Jimmy Kempski wrote an interesting article about Sproles and get your thoughts on it. He suggested that one of the reasons Sproles doesn't get on the field is because of the fast-paced offense and they want to get on the ball more, suggesting that they don't want him to run multiple plays, so therefore they can't get him out there as much.
Yeah, I just don't think – I think people don't realize what kind of player Darren Sproles is and the fact he's a situational guy and he can't handle touching the football 20 to 25 times. He's also older. So all that comes into it. He's actually right at where he was last year as far as touches go on a percentage basis. Mm-hmm. A lot of it more recently has been wide receiver, sort of split out in the slot because they've had so many issues at that position. But he'll get more touches this week because Ryan Matthews isn't there, and he needs to.
And he doesn't seem to like it, though, John. He doesn't seem to like the fact. I mean, for the first time, from all my understanding, you deal with Sproles more than I would, but he seems like a pretty quiet guy. For him to voice his opinion seems like there's some frustration there.
Tremendously quiet guy, but I think the frustration stems from the losing. I think he would be fine if this team was 7-2, but anytime you have a proud player like that who's very effective in what he does do, and you're losing and you're under 500, in his mind he could help. And he probably could, but I think you have to understand that when DeMarco Murray and Ryan Matthews are up and healthy, they're going to get the majority of the touches, and rightfully so, from the running back position. If you look at Darren Sproles' effectiveness dating back all the way to San Diego and then New Orleans, it was generally as a third down back, as that outlet receiver for guys like Drew Brees. And that's what he's most effective at. And that's where I think the Eagles don't utilize him enough, because when you're throwing underneath the sticks all the time, it's better to get it to a guy like Darren Sproles than trying to get it to a guy like Josh Huff, who's not going to make somebody miss and be able to get the first down.
Yeah, and we talked a lot about the receivers yesterday, John, on the show, and how do those receivers match up this week? Is Tampa Bay secondary should they play that Tampa 2 with Lovie Smith over there, so they should be able to get off the line of scrimmage at least this week.
Yeah, that's the one thing about the Tampa 2 I've never liked, is the fact that as a quarterback, you know where everybody's going to line up, basically. And the Bucs, even Lovie Smith, has morphed a little bit because they understand you can't sit in that defense like you used to do in Chicago 90% of the time. So they're more multiple. Zach Ertz kind of talked about that. You'll see some single high safety. You'll see some more man-to-man coverage than usual for a Tampa 2 team, and that's just the reality of the game now, because as I said, you basically can create your matchups against Tampa 2. So if you want to match Jordan Matthews up against a certain corner and you don't become a multiple defense, you know where that guy's going to be lined up on every single play. And that's been the biggest issue for people who run that defense in recent seasons. Now, the problem is the Eagles don't have the talent at the wide receiver position to take advantage of that. And I've said, dating back weeks, Mike, this receiving group doesn't have an edge on anybody in the NFL. They do not. This is the worst receiving group in the NFL. So even though you're not thrilled by the Tampa Bay defensive backfield, trust me, they're not going to be scared of what the Eagles bring at the wide receiver position.
Yeah, nor should they. The funny part about this, they got Sanchez in the game, and we think the running game might be better because of it. But how much does the running game get affected with Ryan Matthews not playing?
A little bit, but that's where Sproles comes in, and that's where the depth comes in. I think it's right. I think one of the great things, not necessarily for Sproles, but the fact that he's not worn down at this point of the season, and now Ryan Matthews is out, all of a sudden he can handle more touches. Where maybe if he was touching the football 10 to 15 times a game through 9 games, he wouldn't be prepared to do that. But it's certainly, running back is one of the deepest positions on the Eagles, and you'll see it this week because they're not going to miss a beat with Darren Sproles in there. And you can't say that about every position. So, yeah, even though Ryan Matthews has been very effective, Eagles had to know this was coming. We've talked about his injury history. It's just you can't count on him to be there for 16 weeks, and the Eagles kind of realize that.
All right, before we get your pick on the game, John's got it up at 97.3 ESPN.com. But first, couple games I want to get your picks on. Dallas, Romo returning against the suddenly hot Miami Dolphins. Romo being back, does that get them a win?
I'm leaning towards the Cowboys just because I think the Dolphins are a really bad team. I wouldn't say they're hot. And I think that was a horrible loss for the Eagles against that team that just didn't show a lot of discipline and didn't play well. I don't expect Tony Romo, obviously, to hit the ground running. There's going to be some rust, but I think he'll do enough, certainly more than Brandon Weeden or Matt Castle, to get him over the hump against a very bad football team, even on the road. A
couple other biggies. Green Bay's playing Minnesota in the North.
Well, yeah, that's the most interesting game of the week for me because I want to see if the Vikings are for real. I think they're a better more talented football team than Green Bay from top to bottom, but the one caveat you put on that is the quarterback. And even though Aaron Rodgers is banged up and he hasn't been playing well, or at least up to his standards, you kind of know he understands how important this game is, and he's going to bring his A game. So I'm very interested to see if Mike Zimmer's defense can kind of keep the Packers going in the wrong direction. If the Vikings win this game, they're going to win the NFC North, and they're going to be a significant contender in the NFC.
All right, John McMullen will get his pick on the Eagles in a minute. Cincinnati, Arizona. Think about that statement I just made, John. Cincinnati Bengals and the Arizona Cardinals. A game between those two teams got moved to primetime.
Yeah, and it could be a Super Bowl preview. It really could. I think it's the most talented team in the AFC against the most talented team in the NFC. So I could definitely see that rematching in Santa Clara for Super Bowl 50. I think this is almost a logical loss for Cincinnati, and people are going to start jumping off buildings if they lose their second in a row. But I wouldn't be all that concerned if I was a Bengals fan, because Arizona is that good, and obviously the game is a home game for them. And you saw their signature win, sort of like Minnesota's going for their signature win this week. I think the Cardinals got theirs last week by scoring 39 points in Seattle.
All right, there's some of the better games this weekend in the NFL. And last one I'll throw your way is just to get your feelings on Washington and whether or not they can knock off this Panthers team.
No. I mean, no. But the Redskins are better than people think they are. But this Carolina team, especially defensively, we always talk about Kirk Cousins being a streaky quarterback, and streaky quarterbacks tend to go off against bad defenses, and that's exactly what he did against the Saints. And against a good defense, you're probably going to see the Kirk Cousins that throws 2 or 3 interceptions, some of them in key situations. That defense is just going to be too much for the Washington Redskins.
All right, back here in Philly, it'll be Tampa coming to town. We saw a bad Miami team in here last week pull off a win. I don't know who's worse, Miami or Tampa, but give me your thoughts on this one.
Well, yeah, I think Miami's worse. I think Tampa Bay's going in the right direction. A lot of that has to do with the quarterback. But I think the Eagles are a better team. I've said it. They're a better team with Mark Sanchez. My concern with that is obviously hasn't had much practice time with the number ones, just a week. And we'll see how quickly he can get up to speed. But I think you're going to see the tempo return to that offense. Not to say there's not going to be mistakes, because there certainly are. But I think the Eagles are on track, and I got them winning the game 24-20.
24-20 is the pick. Eagles over Tampa. That's for John. We'll have Pick the Perfect Score coming up in 1 hour. You're playing for $700 this week. If you know this week's Eagles score, 24-20, says John McMullen of 97.3 ESPN.com and today's Pigskin.com, where he covers the league on a national level. All right, John, good luck. Enjoy the game this weekend, and we'll see you on Tuesday. We'll talk to you on Monday.
Hey, thanks, Mike.
All right.